Hey, Glenn here with another Arpy video. This series is an over-the-shoulder look at how I created the Arpy website project template for Delphi. I simply recorded all of the work I did to create the template and then broke it up into what seemed like logical sections. This will probably be the basis of a training program, so if you follow along and get all the way to the end, I'm sure you'll get a very good understanding of how this approach works. Try to keep back at double speed. Let's go! This introductory section shows you where I started and where I ended up. I took the developer trial of Arpy, converted it to the production version, and then created a Delphi project for a fully functional Bootstrap themed website which you can start customizing straight away. We started with the Arpy developer trial, which is a web API project, so it's not so good for delivering HTML, although you can get HTML like this. We then morph into an Arpy website with a Bootstrap theme. What you're seeing here is mostly Bootstrap, but there's quite a bit of Arpy magic going on underneath. We'll come to how that works in a later section. This is the kind of website you'll be able to produce with very little effort. As a designer, I make a pretty good developer, so what the website looks like now becomes less important to me and I can get on with the mechanics. You'll get all of this simply by going New Project Arpy Website. You can then just customize it to your needs. You see, you don't have to worry about managing the menus, the little hamburger, or how it behaves on handheld devices or the desktop. The theme just takes care of that. You'll also get field validation and pop-ups driven mostly by jQuery and other JavaScript libraries that are contained within the theme. Themes can do this validation in different ways, so it's not all for free. In part 1, we need to set up the project folders to better support website development. We also need to convert from the developer trial to the production version of Arpy. If you are continuing with the developer trial, I'll try to point out where the differences are so that you can still follow along. We also need to set up the build events so that the web pages are deployed automatically with the application. And finally, we'll set up the rendering engine so we can return the dynamic content. Okay, we'll start with the Arpy developer trial and put that in a folder called Arpy website. So first thing is just rename the project and then tidy up the folders and the remnant project file that was created. Also create the component source folder, just following the convention for project bundling. We don't need the RPDCUs anymore, that's for the trial. So if you're on the trial, you need to keep that folder and don't create the component source folder at this point. Okay, we need views where we're going to render our dynamic web pages. We'll need content a bit later on. Okay, so these are the production folders that we need for Arpy. We'll put those into component source. There's a few remnants lying around, so obviously you don't need to worry about those in your project. They shouldn't be there. That's only from my development. Okay, so we need the views folder where we're going to render our dynamic content from a little later. So we'll get rid of this older structure where developer licensing is changed for just licensing. So that licensing folder will allow other third-party vendors to create licenses for Arpy middleware components. Now, I've got to have a little bit of trouble here with the icon. So I didn't copy it across, and instead of just copying it, I tried to fix it up, but after a bit of struggling, I managed to put the default one back. So next, because we've moved all of the folders, we have wrong source paths now. So we'll fix those up. So always use the search paths instead of installing into the components, into the into the actual project. Well, that's what I prefer anyway, although it does have some downsides, particularly with searching. So use your own discretion there. If you want to actually add these to the project instead, you could do that, although there's an awful lot of things to add there. So I'm just adding the folders to the search path. Now, I did forget the OpenSSL. I tried to do it from memory. So again, if I'd just looked it up, it would have been a lot easier. But instead, no, I remember it. But I didn't really remember it. So we'll just struggle a little bit. And I eventually get it right. Okay, then we're linking and the program's running. We just have to fix up the firewall setting and then check that it's working, and it is. So we're pretty much set up with a new production version of Arpy ready to go. So next we'll just, instead of returning content there, we'll just redirect it to the middleware, the static files middleware, and just ask it to load the index.html. So root will now point to index.html, which we'll need to create. So just go and create a new web page. So what we want to do is use the build events to deploy our content and our views. So if we just use the xcopy command, which is quite a powerful command, it gives us a lot of features, including things like copy of newer, which is quite key for this. You can also do by date and subfolders and folders even that are empty, those kinds of things. So what we want is our whole website to be deployed to the bin folder, not just the executable. So that's why we're putting in the build events. Okay, so that seems to be working. So the application's running and the content we need has been deployed to the bin folder along with the exe. So now we should be able to access the folder. But we need to do the other folder as well. That's why I realised that I had it wrong, and I needed to actually create the static files folder, which is content, and the dynamic file folder, which is views. So anything that we're going to dynamically render, we need to get from views. Anything that we deploy statically, we put in the content folder. Again, this is just by convention, and one of the things about Arpy is that it's convention over configuration. So if you do it the same way all the time, somebody who comes along and shares your project later will understand where the parts fit together. So the other convention is that dynamic content, just to get a degree of separation, we use the HTML extension for dynamic and the HTML for static content. So this is where I realised that, I had it mucked around. So I've just fixed this up so that it's copying the content to the web root and copies the views to the views folder. So what we don't want to happen is that our dynamically rendered views get into the web root. We want to make sure that the user can't navigate to those views, so that it's outside of the web root. So I think I actually finally got it all correct now, so that this works reading from index.html, and we're returning our content. And just so to make it easier to see, I can say hello world from index. And you notice that that said, that there was a build error. What that really means is the application was still running, but I still wanted the build events to fire so that the content was copied over. So you might see me do that quite a bit, is where I click on build, but what I'm really saying is, copy the content, copy the content. And the fact that the application is still running means that I actually don't need to restart or anything to get new content. All I need to click on is build, and it will actually do it. So after tidying those pages up, now it makes a bit more sense. We're getting hello world from index, and we've updated the header so that we can see where things are coming from. That'll become a bit more important in the next video, but essentially we're preparing now for the dynamic content. So we're setting up a route that says go to any unnamed page and just render it. So there's some design issues with that approach, which we'll need to discuss shortly, but essentially that says if you go to any page, it's probably one you want to render. So now if we add the rendering engine support by adding the unit, Arpy render, and we need to tell the application that what rendering engine to use, so we use the standard rendering engine since that's the only one there is. So now that uses, again, convention over configuration, it uses the views folder. So that standard rendering engine, its role is to find things in the views folder and deliver them dynamically. So that probably is working now. So if we now go to just index, it will return from the views folder. So we can see the difference there, that one is being dynamically rendered and one is being statically rendered by the middleware. Okay, so it's not really being dynamically rendered at the moment, isn't it changing anything? So dynamically rendering essentially means you pick up some parts, shuffle it around a little bit, do something with it, and then deliver it. Whereas the static one is there's a file, deliver it. There's another file, deliver it. So what we're now doing is reconfiguring for a website, which normally has a home page, and so we're going to ask it to render the index.html file. So now we've actually changed the application this time, so we do have to restart the application. And so now if we go to home, that is the same effect as going to index, and index.html you see still works because that's a statically delivered file. So now we've got all of the three basic routes all pointing to the same spot. Okay, so that's pretty much the end of the first video. So where did we get to? We have a fully working release version of Arpy running with both static files and dynamic rendering. We have our default routes set up and we're ready now to move on to part 2, which is mainly server-side composition using HTML tags and the standard rendering engine. Part 3 works a bit more on Arpy's site control tags, which give you basic control over HTML elements without having to write any JavaScript. I'll hope you'll continue with the series. It gets a lot more interesting from here on.